Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kazuo Kodama, President of the Foreign Press Center Japan, and I will moderate today's symposium. October the 1st of this year marked the 45th anniversary of the Foreign Press Center Japan. We came this far thanks to your steadfast and enduring support of our activities. I would like to take this opportunity to pledge that the FPCJ will continue to act as a reliable facilitator between foreign press and interviewees in Japan, supporting foreign press to contribute to quality reporting on Japan throughout the world. I would also like to take this opportunity to express the deepest condolences of myself and all my colleagues at Foreign Press Center Japan for atomic bomb survivor, Mr. Sunao Tsuboi, a great representative of Hiroshima, who recently passed away. In the last 45 years of the FPCJ, we have taken thousands of journalists from all over the world to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There was no better person than Mr. Tsuboi to tell us how precious a world without conflicts, wars, and nuclear weapons is. He was keen to talk to journalists about what happened in Hiroshima, along with details of his experiences. Thank you very much, Tsuboi-san, and we hope you will rest in peace, although you will probably never give up fighting for a world without nuclear weapons. The topic of today's international webinar is the future of media, competition and coexistence between social media and news organizations. This webinar received support from both the Japan Newspaper Publishers and Editors Association and the International University of Japan. I would like to thank everyone involved for their support. I would like to make a few technical announcements. The panelists today will speak either English or Japanese, accompanied by simultaneous interpretation. If you have downloaded the Zoom app, an interpretation button should be visible at the bottom right of your screen. Select your desired language. Browser version does not support the interpretation function. So if you would like to hear the interpretation, download the Zoom app and join using it. This explanation is currently being interpreted, so please check to make sure you can hear the language you have selected. Materials for today's keynote speeches were already sent to the email address you registered with, but you can also download them from the URL found using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Both Japanese and English versions are available. For the Q&A session, we will be accepting questions to panelists and speakers only through Zoom's Q&A button. We will stop accepting questions at 5 o'clock sharp, but you can send them at any time before then. When you send a question, be sure to include your name, your affiliation, and who the question is for. Depending on the time, please be aware that it may not be possible to respond to all the questions. As a moderator, let me explain why we have picked this topic. If I were asked to single out one salient characteristic of our age, it is an age in which people, wherever they are in the world, can share information simultaneously and instantly. I say this an age of transcending space and time. Social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter epitomize this age and have grown to play a major role as a source of information and communication for the public. With the spread of social media, governments, businesses, and individuals can present information and their viewpoints without relying on news organization as a middleman. Social media has become an indispensable tool for social and political movements in authoritarian countries where there are limits on freedom of speech and of the press. social media has also become indispensable to news organizations. They act as secondary sources, reporting information appearing on social media and cover trends on social media as public opinion. Now, with these trends as a backdrop, we are going to discuss what COVID-19 has exposed, a number of challenges to both news organizations and social media. It has been extremely difficult for news organizations to constantly be accurate in reporting on the nature of this novel virus, COVID-19, on the effectiveness and safety of newly developed vaccines, and on what is true and what is misinformation. When faced with a pandemic, the media's role as a watchdog, monitoring the government and ensuring accountability for the information the government releases can become difficult, with a tendency to be compliant with the government. This can become a factor in people distrusting the news media, and the criticism of news organizations can also be seen on social media. At the same time, on social media, where there is a lack of fact-checking or self-restraint, there are countless opinions from various experts along with blunt statements from the public. The lack of checking has led to social media becoming a hotbed for anonymous, irresponsible arguments, abuse, lies, and fake news. So when it comes to vaccines, there are unsubstantiated claims about side effects, such as becoming sterile or having your genome rewritten. By re-examining the differences between the role of news organizations and social media through the lens of issues brought to the forefront by the pandemic, the future pathway to healthy, I say, healthy competition and coexistence may become clearer. We will now begin the first session, the issues and challenges traditional news organizations are facing with the rise of social media and the resulting self-importance. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to invite Mr. Susumu Shimoyama, a distinguished non-fiction writer who has been teaching and researching on the media in 2050 at the universities, and also recently published his book titled Media in 2050. Now, Mr. Shimoyama, you have the floor.
Right. Okay, now I'll share my slide. Oops. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Kodama. And okay, I am a non-fiction writer, and actually I published 5 books, and whole 5 are concerning about media. And my first book was published in 1995, so therefore I have covered media nearly 3 decades. And today, I just would like to explain overview of, legacy media, how, we and they are suffering from, attack of new media and social media. And is it our friend or our enemy? Okay, now we have to understand that we are in the era of mega change since Gutenberg, and the invention of the printing press made it possible for ordinary people to access information which was once exclusively owned by the people with power. Because of that invention, newspaper companies and publishing companies were born in 15th century. And democracy was born after centuries of struggles by people with knowledge through that news organizations. And so now we have been facing mega changes since the invention of the printing press. It is internet, of course. It was invented in 1960s and has become widespread since 1990s with several technological innovations. And it has totally changed the world and media in the last 20 years. So let's look at how newspapers in Japan has changed in last 20 years. So this is a graph of total circulation of Japanese newspapers. And as you see, Japanese newspapers have lost 10 million copies only in last 10 years. I think the situation is the same across all other industrialized countries. So legacy media is suffering. And so let's look at individual companies in Japan, and Asahi and Nikkei. And Asahi, which has not succeeded yet in digital subscription, has lost, as you see, it's a red line, almost half of its revenue in last 15 years, dropping from 400 billion yen to 230 billion yen. On the contrary, Nikkei, which started the Nikkei digital edition in 2010, and has increased its revenue by 10 billion yen, as you see in the line of yellow. And the Nikkei digital edition currently has 820,000 subscribers. Nikkei has lost almost the same number in printed edition subscribers. However, it has been offset by the gain of digital edition. So I can say Nikkei is sustainable, and I'm afraid to say Asahi is not. And why Asahi is not sustainable? Let's think about that. And Asahi also started digital edition in 2011, 1 year later than Nikkei, but subscriber numbers remain low in 10 years. I think this is because editors and reporters at Asahi were influenced by the way of free media like BuzzFeed and Huffington Post, and which put page views as top priority. Asahi still offers their articles for free through Yahoo, and LINE and other outlets does not understand what the subscription business is, and the reporters and editors does not understand what kind of articles people want to read in a digital subscription. And as if you see the situation of BuzzFeed and Huffington Post, and they are all suffering because of advertising revenue was hit by COVID-19 economic crisis. And so let's look at weekly news magazine, and all weekly news magazines are suffering. Time and Newsweek, and however, there is only one weekly news magazine which still grow in its circulation. This is London Economist, and it's very interesting to look at what is their strategy. And the Economist says in its annual report in 2017, it says, quote, Google and Facebook take almost 60% of global digital advertising revenue. And in recent years, they have had as much as 99% of the growth in American revenue. And I think if you put a word, Google and Facebook, okay, so in Japan, we have SoftBank owned Yahoo, and they played a role at Google and Facebook. Let's look at how they have grown. And this graph is total revenue of Yahoo in last 20 years. And when they only earned 51 billion yen revenue in 2000. However, since all major newspapers except Nikkei offered articles to Yahoo by 2010, Yahoo has become big news portal, and it boasts more than 200 billion page views monthly and has collected major portion of the revenue in Japanese internet market. And Yahoo merged with LINE in 2020, and its total revenue now exceeds 1 trillion yen. And so let's think about, social media and enemy or friend. I think its enemy for media which depend on ads, like most newspapers, Asahi and Yomiuri, and TV stations, which totally depend on ads, and BuzzFeed and Huffington Post. However, social media is a friend for media, which gains digital subscription through social network service. Like The Economist and the New York Times and Washington Post and Nikkei. Actually, I had a short conversation with today's panelist and founder of Lapra, Chai, and she explained that Facebook has been a friend, and I just would like to listen her view on a later discussion. But anyway, I interviewed Tom Standage, and he is the head of digital strategy of The Economist. And he said, Economist invested third-party digital channels to get subscribers. Snapchat and Apple News and Twitter and podcast, Facebook. And so, as I said, broadcast media is also suffering. And year of 2020 are, miserable year for networks. And the pandemic is expected to lead to a 6 to 20% decline in revenue for Japanese TV. And however, I found there is one local media TV company, but it's cable TV company in Japan, which is immune to this COVID pandemic ad decline. And I will explain that small cable TV in a Tottori prefecture in the last of this presentation. And this is Chukai TV, and it's in Tottori prefecture. It's western part of Japan, and they started their broadcasting. Actually, they started to wire their programs in 1990, and they only started with 100 subscribers. However, now they do have more than 50,000 subscribers in a Tottori. And as you see, even in a year of 2020, they increased their revenue. The reason is, when they started, they dedicated 2 channels specializing in local information and local news, like New York One. And so these 2 channels are indispensable for locals in a Tottori. And that is why locals in a Tottori are willing to pay money to subscribe Chukai TV. And they also gain subscribers through social network service. So at last, I just would like to say that media which can offer very unique content on a subscription basis only can survive, and they get paid subscribers through social media. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shimayama-san. As I take it, I think your verdict on social media, friend or foe, is very straightforward. I think you say for news media operating through advertising income, social media is hard to beat. On the other hand, for news media operating on subscription fees, maybe symbiotic relationship is possible. And then your final point is also very interesting for me to hear that you said the news media which can offer very unique content. I think this can maybe argued later by our panelists. What do you mean by very unique content on a subscription basis can survive? In any case, stimulating, I think, viewpoint. Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let us move on to the panel discussion. Well, I would like to introduce today's panelists, first of all. As a panelist from, yes, the United States, yes, we have Mr. Peter Landis, a Tokyo Bureau Chief for the Wall Street Journal. And he will speak first, and then followed by Mr. Robin Harding, Asia editor for the Financial Times from the UK. And then from the Philippines, Ms. Chai Fofilena, the founder and managing editor of Rappler. As you know, of course, the Maria is her colleague. It was the recipient of this year's Nobel Peace Prize. Now, in the panel discussion, we would like to discuss the issues and challenges traditional news organizations are facing with the rise of social media. Shimayama-san has already touched on this and possible way forward. So I'd like each three of the panelists speak for about 5 minutes each, and then move on to free discussion. So first, I would like to invite Peter Landis, the Wall Street Journal's Tokyo Bureau Chief. Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for organizing this panel today. And I concur with much of what Mr. Shimayama said, especially his remark at the end about offering unique content on a subscription basis. And that's what the Wall Street Journal has also aimed to do. We started charging for a subscription to the Wall Street Journal now 25 years ago. I believe it was in November 1996. So almost exactly 1/4 century ago, we decided on that kind of subscription model. And I see even more these days the importance of that unique content that Mr. Shimayama mentioned. And we've even started labeling some of our stories as WSJ News exclusive, just to stress to readers that our information is exclusive and not available anywhere else. And I noticed that other news organizations, even in Japan, are doing similar things to show that we've always had exclusives. And my friends today at the FT and Rappler have always had exclusives. But now I think we need to stress to readers even more because they're paying for our content that they are getting something special that's not available on a free website. So I'll give a few thoughts on our theme of the issues and challenges traditional news organizations are facing with the rise of social media. And as again, Mr. Shimayama mentioned, Facebook, Google, and also in the US, Amazon are taking really the lion's share of the new advertising dollars. And we had an article saying that this year, these digital platforms are expected to add something like $25 billion in ad revenue. And that increase in a single year is 3 times the total amount of ad revenue of all US newspapers. So you get a sense of the scale of these new advertising platforms. Now, in the old day, I have a copy of our Wall Street Journal right here, and it was a big deal. You might see an advertisement actually here on the top of page 1. And it was a big deal when we added an advertisement on the first page of our print edition. That was quite a while ago, and people fretted about it. Now no one really talks about it anymore. But even when I joined the Wall Street Journal in the late 1990s or the early 2000s, the print advertising revenue was really our big source of revenue for the company. And that has almost disappeared, and that's not new. I would say what is more new is that we're beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we've moved to mostly a subscription model, and we rely very little these days on print advertising. That used to be the core. Now it's a very small part. I'll give you some numbers from our recent annual report. About 2/3 of the revenue of Dow Jones, that's the parent of the Wall Street Journal, comes from subscription and circulation. And even when you talk about advertising, we try to stress to advertisers the value of placing their message around trusted content and not just any sort of random message that might appear on a site like Facebook or TikTok. I almost said TikTok. And we have had success in building our digital advertising. In the fiscal year that ended June 30th, digital advertising accounted for about 58% of total advertising. That was up from just 46% the previous year. So what that means is, even if you look at our advertising revenue, most of it is now coming from digital, whereas even as recently as the previous year, more than half was coming from print, traditional print sources. And I'd be curious to know, I think Shimoyama-san talked about the Asahi and Nikkei. I would be curious to know what percentage of their advertising does come from digital. Some people I think today we're going to discuss also, social media, friend or foe. Are they friend or an enemy of traditional news organizations? And I agree with the perspective that they can be a friend. And we do have things that we can learn from these social media platforms. One thing that we have focused on increasingly in the last couple of years is our headlines. It's a traditional art in the newspaper business, but we've had to improve our game during this period, knowing that many people, they just see one headline, perhaps on a social media site. Maybe it's even Facebook or Twitter. They see just that one headline. And so we really need to do our best to say in that headline very concisely, very briefly, what the story is about and why you should want to read it. I think in the old days, when you had a print newspaper like this, maybe a person subscribes to the newspaper and they get it and they just start to read it, and the headline's not so important because they already have the paper in their hand. But nowadays, that headline is so important. So we do have a lot to learn from social media, and I think there can be a symbiotic or win-win relationship to some extent, but they are, again, also our rival in terms of advertising. So I'll stop there and very much look forward to hearing what other panelists have to say.
Peter, thank you very much. I took note of your words, like the values to be attached to the exclusivity of the stories, which Wall Street Journal carries, and also the trusted content you use, and also a lot to learn from social media. So thank you very much. I think lots of food for thought. Now, let me move on to the next panelist, distinguished panelist from UK, the Financial Times, Mr. Robin Harding. Robin, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Kodama-san, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event. I should say, very first of all, I agree with almost everything Shimoyama-san and Peter had to say. So this is going to be one of those panels where people agree with each other, but I will try to say some slightly different things and in a slightly different way. I should also emphasize that I'm talking entirely for myself, and this is not a corporate view on behalf of the Financial Times. So I think we all agree that the biggest threat social media pose to traditional media is economic. But I think it's not as simple as them just being a competitor for ad revenue. The threat is much broader than that. So social media in many ways is a better news medium than anything that has ever existed in the world before. So with social media, you can get facts from anybody in the world on the scene when something happens almost instantly. Your social media feed can be completely customized to your preferences. And for you as a user, it's 100% free. So that's a pretty incredible news experience. So if you wanted to know what was going on in Afghanistan during the recent events there, yes, you could go to traditional media outlets. You could watch the news on NHK. You could read it on the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal. Or you could go to Twitter and watch video from the ground in Afghanistan almost live as it happened. So it's not just a competitor for money. It's an amazingly powerful news medium in and of itself. The competition for money is also important. You could really think of it as competition for time. Social media is another way for people to spend their time. We've seen when radio came along, it took people's time away from books and newspapers. When TV came along, it took people's time away from radio, books, and newspapers. When video games came along, it took people's time away from TV, radio, newspapers, books. With each new innovation, the share of people's time left for legacy forms of media has shrunk, and inevitably time spent and advertising revenue are very closely linked. But it doesn't destroy people's time spent. They're still interested in the news. Just because a video game is there, they're not going to completely forget about the news. So it doesn't destroy, but it reduces. I think that the third way in which social media are a threat to traditional media is it provides a very easy way to steal and republish the work of traditional news outlets. If you go on Twitter, you will see what people do is they take a photo with their iPhone camera of a story on the page in the Asahi or the Nikkei or the Wall Street Journal or the FT, and they post it on social media. And then anyone who wants to can read it for free. Or else people just summarize or they copy on the web. So it also reduces the barrier to theft and redistribution of our content. And then a final way, I think, in which social media is a very big economic threat to traditional media is that traditional media needs a large audience to pay for printing newspapers and distributing them, or to pay for television studios, or even to pay for loads of journalists and the infrastructure for a website. And to attract a large number of readers or viewers, you need to be somewhere in the middle. You need to not alienate people because you need a lot of them. Whereas on social media, it's perfectly fine to go for a tiny audience. People are quite happy to speak to 1,000 people. And that means you can be as extreme as you like and as specialist as you like. And in fact, strong views will often attract people more easily than middling views. But then now there's all these different voices, and that reduces the power of traditional outlets to attract a big mass moderate audience. So that's the economic challenge. I think it's also social media has posed a threat to the voice and the credibility of traditional media. So it used to be you know, you could go to the pub in the UK and talk to people and they'd say, you can't believe what you read in the newspaper. It's all nonsense. Don't trust those vaccines. But it would just be some person talking to you in a pub, and all the authoritative voices that you heard would be saying, you know, vaccines are safe. But now you can hear from everybody all over the world all the time. And you realize that actually a lot of people are willing to say, oh, vaccines are dangerous. And you start to think, well, actually, maybe that's not so stupid. Lots of people are saying it. I can see someone, they say they're a doctor and they're saying it. So, but what that does to traditional media is it calls our credibility into question. I'm running out of time, so I should stop. Let me briefly say that initially when social media came along, traditional media competed with itself. It tended to give a lot of things away for free on social media. And that was destroying our ability to charge. We've largely stopped doing that. I think that's good. And we've also learned to use social media as a promotion tool, a way to distribute our content, which we charge for, as Peter was saying, to readers, so they see it, they click on their site, and they get value from their subscription. I'll stop there. Thank you. You're on mute, Kodama-san.
Excuse me, pardon. Well, Robin, thank you very much. I think I take your very analytical presentation on where the threat has been coming from, prospering the social media. I think it is very also helpful for our ensuing discussions, I think. And then in any case, I think, thank you very much. Now, let me move on to our third panelist, Chai from the Philippines. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm very, very envious of our the previous presentations. You have very, very niche audiences. That's why I guess you're able to do subscriptions, and you come from very developed economies as well, and they can afford to pay. But for us in the Philippines, we have a totally different situation. I'd like to tell you about Rappler's experience. It's a purely online news organization. We started on Facebook. This was in June or July of this year, but we created our own website in January 2012. So by January of next year, we would turn 10 years old. So relatively young, relatively new. We've seen massive disinformation online, which has adversely affected media credibility, including ours. And traditional media, well, the good thing about social media is that traditional media as sole gatekeepers of news and information has been demolished. It's democratized sourcing and distribution of information, which is actually a good thing. But on the other hand, the quality of information that's going around has been diminished. We've seen this during this pandemic, for example, and it's a dangerous thing. If you, recently there was a survey, people were asked, where do they get their news? In the Philippines, this is the hierarchy of news sources. Television is still preferred, 91%, radio, 49%, the internet, 48%, Facebook, amazing, 44%. And online news sites, 10%, Twitter, 1%, others, 7%. Almost all Filipinos who are online, who are on the internet, are on Facebook. And this is why media organizations like us are compelled to be on Facebook. We have to be where our audience is. In January of this year, we saw that the latest figures show that YouTube has surpassed Facebook as a social media platform of choice, indicating a rising preference for video. This can be dangerous because it's so easy to post video content and anyone can just make all sorts of unverified claims using video. Social media, well, if you look at the good thing, it has enhanced freedom of speech. Everyone has a bullhorn, everyone can speak, anyone can scream. But this freedom has been abused, and we've seen it. So platforms like Facebook have allowed unchecked spread of vitriol, hatred, anger, and threats online. The more negativity, the more viral the content becomes, and it's dictated by Facebook's algorithm. What we've seen also is that threats online become translated to real life threats and danger. So for example, the activists here in the Philippines have been what we call red tagged. When we say red tagged, they're tagged as communists. And therefore, if they are communists, then they are enemies of the state. And that's very dangerous, and it has resulted in actual deaths. And if people are being killed because of, critical and commentary, then they can be targeted and trolls can just go after them. So what happens is they just keep quiet, and dissent and criticism are really silenced, if not muted or tamed. Unfortunately for us, as a purely online media organization, social media is inescapable as a distribution platform. It's a way for us to engage with our audiences. If we depended on our website alone, it would not be sufficient, because Facebook admittedly has wider reach. So while social media eats up advertising, as others have pointed out, smaller and younger media organizations like us have little choice but to remain on these platforms. And yes, we share content that is free. And yes, Facebook gets the big chunk of the ads. And this clearly for us poses a dilemma. How have we tried to address these challenges? We have been forced to innovate and look for other sources of revenues. So it's not just ads. We've been forced, well, not forced, but we've been compelled to look at sources of grants, memberships, new business models that are anchored on big data and tech. These have allowed us to engage with our audiences and have better conversations with non-trolls. In the context of the pandemic, one positive thing that has emerged from this is fact-checking. We've seen it as an effective way of fighting disinformation. But admittedly, it's like Sisyphus pushing a rock up a mountain. And honestly, I'm not sure if it really is making that much of a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Shay. As for the implication of your final remarks, I think I would like the panelists will come back to this issue in the second session. In any case, Professor Yamaguchi is going to talk about these issues in a more full-fledged manner. I would, well, the time is running short, but I have actually picked up a question raised by Peter addressed to Shimoyama-san. If I just repeat his question. So first, I would like to ask Shimoyama-san to answer to the following question, if you can. Question is, what percentage of Asahi or Nikkei's advertising revenue is digital? Please.
Actually, they don't disclose the portion. And so, however, I heard that digital ad revenue, especially within digital edition, is very small. That is what management in Nikkei complains. And but it was 3 years ago when I researched for my book, Media in 2050. The situation might have changed. However, talking about Asahi, offers articles for free news website. And so therefore, they get ad revenue from these, free news website like Yahoo. However, as I explained in my presentation, the portion of what Asahi gains through Yahoo is very small. It's only 10% of total ad revenues. What Asahi articles gains. in a Yahoo portal. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Now to Robin. If you could expand your comment in your which was part of your final remarks. Well, at the beginning, traditional media, well, in a way, gave away valuable content for free. Now it has changed. You said having a social media kind of policy and use it as a promotion tool. Could you give us a little bit example? What kind of promotional the social media policy that today your paper FT has deployed to date?
Okay, so there are two separate issues. A social media policy is for FT journalists when they are on Twitter themselves. And that policy says things like, if you have news, do not tweet it before you have published a story on the FT. So that's one way of stopping our journalists from scooping us. If your journalists are giving away on Twitter or Facebook information before they've even published it on your own website, which they were, then that's one way in which the traditional media was scooping itself. A second way was we used to have policies, and still have some, where if you click from certain social media sites, then you will go past the FT's subscription barrier and you will be able to read articles for free. That's to encourage people to read and subscribe, but you have to limit that so people can get a taste of what your content is like. And then if they want to keep reading it, they have to subscribe. And in the early days of social media, there was a lot of trial and error, but I think the people on the commercial side of the organization are now quite sophisticated about what's the right amount to give away for free.
Thank you. To Peter and also to Chai, listening to again to all of your the first session remarks, I think there seems to be more or less a convergence on the view how to move forward. I think try to find a win-win or some symbiotic kind of a relationship between the two. My question regards you said the exclusivity is very important, and also trust element is very important, and so on. But what about investigative reporting as such? I hear for many years it is costly for the newsroom to conduct investigative reporting. And then especially also to Chai, you are completely online. And then again, you are faced with a very difficult competition with other, rival online media. How you think your media is going to maintain the investigative kind of reporting as also very important, I think, pillar of the integrity of your news media? Peter, if you can first, please.
Yes, what we found is actually the investigative reporting, and sometimes we put the word exclusive next to those investigative reports, if they are in fact exclusive, are some of our biggest drivers of traffic on the website. So if anything, even if you look at it from a commercial perspective, we should probably be doing more investigative reporting, I would say. I should mention that we've had a series this year called the Facebook Files, and it talks about Facebook in some of the same terms that Shai talked about, in the way that it amplifies a conflict. And I'm just looking back at what she said, but it is allowed unchecked spread of vitriol and threats, she mentioned. And our Facebook Files series has described how Facebook is often aware through its own internal studies about these problems and has not really effectively addressed them, partly because it could hurt their own revenue. And some additional parts of those Facebook Files are now in the hands of other news organizations, I think sometimes published under the title Facebook Papers. And so I'd recommend that everyone on this seminar today, if you haven't read these articles in Wall Street Journal and FT and other publications, to certainly check them out, because there's a lot of information about Facebook Again, commercially speaking, we've gotten millions of page views on these exclusive Facebook reports. So I'd say if we can do even more of that, that's even better.
Thank you. Chai, can you comment on this issue?
Yes, I agree that unique content actually sells. We've been very aggressive with our investigative stories, and these investigative projects are very expensive, but partnerships working with other media organizations have helped. And the grants, as I mentioned a while ago, have also been very, very helpful. We've thought about putting these exclusives behind a paywall, but our dilemma is, if we put it behind a paywall, there will be lesser people who will be able to read it, and less of them will also be aware about these issues that people should know about. So for now, we decided, okay, let's just offer it for free, and then maybe think of a formula later on. If people are hooked enough, then maybe we can be like FT or even Wall Street Journal and put more of these content behind paywalls, and hopefully people will be willing to pay.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
I'm just curious. Can you tell us about an exclusive that you had that you felt was really had a lot of impact? We've
been writing about the extrajudicial killings, and this is actually what put us in trouble with the current administration. So all these series about the killings in the drug war, that's one. And then there was also another exclusive about a contract that involved the aide of the president then, who won a senator now. And because of that story, access to the palace was cut. Our palace reporter was banned from the palace. So wherever the president goes, she is not allowed. So we've had to pay for that, but we continue, we soldier on.
Okay, I'm sure we can continue discussion in the session, but time is also running out. So you can come back anything you want to in a concluding session or the second session. Now let's move on to the second session. For the second session, I would like to, of course, to focus on the problems with the social media, such as anonymity, allowing for the spread of irresponsible extremism, abuse, unconfirmed information, lies, and fake news, and then what news organization can do about it. And I would now like to invite Professor Mr. Shinichi Yamaguchi, Associate Professor for the International University of Japan Center for Global Communications, to present his keynote speech on this topic. Yamaguchi-sensei, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Kodama, for a wonderful introduction. So I'd like to share this slide with you on the screen. Hello, good afternoon to you. As it has been introduced, I am Yamaguchi. I would like to talk about the issue of fake news and media in an era where everyone is a reporter. As you know very well, there is a social media out there which is being diffused. It has become an indispensable, essential media for every one of us. I think many of you use the social media in one way or another. Social media in a public forum can say anything. You can report everything. So we are in the era where everyone can be a reporter. That is a wonderful tool, of course. But with the advent of such a wonderful tool, there is always a dark side to it, a negative side, represented one of which is a fake news, misinformation, and disinformation, which is becoming a big issue. On the left-hand side, you can see the famous Pizzagate, 2016 United States presidential election. There are many people who believed in the fake news, who fired the gun. On the right-hand side, you can see the WHO's website. On the website, is warning us of the infodemic about the COVID. Many disinformation is out there with regard to the COVID. Warning from the WHO, if you drink methanol, you get cured. That kind of misinformation, and the people believe that, some of them, and have died as a result of it. So whenever we talk about fake news in Japan, people said, oh, it's just a fake news prevalence in the West, Europe, and the United States. But it's not true. We have a viral spread of fake news in Japan as well, particularly pertaining to the COVID, which is giving a big impact on the society. For example, take your deep breath, keep it for 10 seconds. This is a self-check which have been advocated by the experts on the message app. This information went around, and the Aichi Prefecture Police believed in it and they retweeted it. And also, when the state of emergency was on in April 2020, it said that opposition party are refusing to have a diet session and deliberation, which was tweeted from the lower house parliamentarian, but it was not true. Diet was not held because ruling party and opposition party had agreed. In September 2020, with regard to the fake news, analysis was made, and there was 10 COVID-10 politics in total. 20 fake news was used for the analysis and try to find out how people would react to it. And first finding was we were dealing with only 20 fake news, but 51.7%, one or more of every 2 persons have come into contact with those kind of fake news, one or more. If you look at the graph, you can see that there are people who didn't know that it was a misinformation after they got contact with such information. So if you look at it, with regard to the COVID-related misinformation, 41.1% didn't know it was misinformation. And in terms of domestic politics, it was 81.2%. 4 out of every 5 persons had believed the political misinformation to be true. Moreover, there is no difference amongst the age group. It's not only a matter for young ones, older ones are also involved, elderly were also involved. And one thing which had struck me, there is a COVID out there and the politics. Why was it that there was a striking difference between the people who believed the misinformation between COVID and the politics? There are many reasons, but one is whether there was a fact check done or not with regard to the COVID, which has to do with healthcare, life, and the medicine. Many of the information have been subject to fact check, and mass media had reported about it through TV and newspaper. So there are many more opportunities for fact check findings so that people's misinformation have been corrected. But when it comes to politics-related information, mass media doesn't fact check very much, and the fact check findings are not reported by media that much. Of course, media is supposed to be politically neutral, so that they find it difficult to send out the political news, which means that there is a free ground out there where people can believe almost anything, be it the misinformation about the political news. That is the situation we are in. So people cannot see which one is a fake news. This is a mathematical model which was used for analysis. In terms of literacy, the information literacy is low. What does it mean by information literacy? The people can tell whether it's a raw data or not. People can tell whether some commentary has been included or not. That kind of thing. The interpretation capability of the data given and so forth. So we talk about IT, digital literacy, but the information literacy is very important, which turned out to be very low. What about attributes? The internet use history is very short. tend to have a high self-esteem and trust of social media. Having a high self-esteem is an important point according to the US study, different study. With regard to fake news, one thinks that one is right or not. Then 75% of the people tends to over-evaluate themselves in terms of their judgment-making capability, and they are so vulnerable to misinformation, gullible, believe everything which has been said. And there are discontented people. Higher the discontent, they tend to be deceived by the misinformation. And complaints on the mass media tended to be high with regard to the political fake news. All these attributes played a big role. One more point, the viral effect of the fake news, how much it spreads. So you believe in fake news and they tend to spread it to others. They tend to spread the news directly to someone close, like family member and the parents and so forth. So Facebook and Twitter, so social media will be a medium for spreading the news, but people have a word of mouth type of contact to tell the misinformation to someone close to you directly, orally. That's one more thing which was found out. So this is a fake news that I've been talking about, and lately this has been a noteworthy development topic of a vaccine. Of course, there is a rising interest over vaccine and over social media. False claim about the vaccine went around and went viral. The minister in charge of vaccine used to be Minister Kono, and he appeared on the TV and denied the false claim about the vaccine. You can see the newspaper article on the right-hand side. What is the graph on the left-hand side? The blue line represents the vaccine word-contained tweets. Orange within the Twitter, which included the word vaccine, which also included dubious information. So if you look at the blue, the number of tweets since the March 2021, of course, belatedly vaccination has started in Japan from March over to August this year. The term vaccine has been tweeted so much, which goes to show how much interest people had over vaccine in Japan. Look at the orange. It peaked out in May, and the false claim tend to be on the level. That is because the Mr. Kono in charge of vaccine denied himself the false claim, and also social media firms had dealt with more appropriately with the influencers and so forth, and tried to deny also the false claim. That's the reason. So with regard to false claim over the vaccine, it's a famous story. This is the CCTH findings. And it was found out that 65% of the misinformation was spread by just 12 disinformation dozen. So they were just like a super spreaders. They can spread the news to 59 million people with only dozen of disinformant. They are so influential. According to a survey, not only limited to vaccine, but with regard to on any other general topic, you can see that 0.62% of super spreaders of fake news can have the news to go around and go viral up to 96.96%. There are countermeasures that can be taken, which is a fact check. Check can be very effective, which have been demonstrated in the analysis. For example, previously, former Prime Minister Suga, he was said to be vaccinated with a fake vaccine. That's a rumor. In March, and 499 tweets were made, out of which 474 have been affirmed. So 95% of the reader of the tweets believed it. But in April, fact-check article was transmitted. Tweet amounted to 48 to 10, out of which 99.7%, 4,800 of tweets started to spread around the fact-checked results. So fact-check can change the transmitters of the information and can replace a Twitter story. And this is also the number of tweeters tweeted in Japanese language on the left-hand side as of June, about 300 tweets per day. But sometimes it has a spike in the graph. The reason is that Minister Kono appeared in TV program and denied the false claim over vaccine, which pushed up the number of the tweets. Please look at the right-hand side. The upper bar, as of June, the relationship between vaccine and the infertility. If you look at the dark blue one, it shows that people who believe in the going infertility, if vaccinated, it was 61.19% of blue as of June the 4th, but the 20th of June, when Minister Kono appeared on this TV, then blue was reduced to 29.31%. Relationship between vaccine and the infertility. If people have come to in contact with those, but believers number had decreased in this relationship and correlation. So top people can be influential in spreading around the fact-checked results. So in the infodemics, there are certain expectations one can have on media. 3 of them. 1, the quality can be emphasized in reporting and don't invite misunderstanding and so forth. And second is to have a work to raise the reliability of mass media. You can see the US mass media reliability, which is on the decline on the down below. Same here in Japan. So reliability of mass media need to be raised further because that would be in favor of the business of the mass media themselves. And also there are people who have a high complaints over mass media who tends to be gullible and believe what has been mentioned. So it's very important that the reliability will go up for mass media. And also various stakeholders have to be involved in fact check and spread that around. You can see on the right-hand side, the fact check platform in ROK, mass media and other institutions are working together on the fact check. We don't have such a partnership yet in Japan, but that can be promoted so that the fact check, the results can be shared with the general public at large. That would be very helpful. Thank you for the attention. That's it from me.
Thank you, Professor Yamaguchi. Thank you very much. First, on your evidence-based, I think, a data-based analysis on how the social media is really, I think, is sometimes is engulfed with the problem of misinformation and dissemination of these things. And then your final kind of 3 points advice to the news media, I think it's fair enough. But then maybe I would be great if the following panelists also can respond to his advice. The second one, of course, implement measures to increase trust in the news media. I wonder what kind of concrete measures to increase the trust of public in the news media, could be. Anyway, now this time I will start asking the Robin of Financial Times to give us his thoughts on this topic for 5 minutes, to be followed by Chai, and then finally Peter, and then we'll have a free discussion. In the meantime, may I address to listeners, viewers, we very much appreciate your questions or to be addressed to the panelists or the speakers of this symposium. We will have a Q&A session later. So please, if you have any questions, send us your questions to us. Now, the floor is yours, Robin, please.
Okay, thank you very much, and for another very interesting presentation. Let me repeat my, these are personal comments only, because I'm about to say something quite cynical. That is that from the point of view of a traditional media organization, the abuse, unconfirmed information, lies, fake news on social media is actually quite a good thing. That is because if the information on social media was reliable, then it would be a completely unbeatable competitor for organizations like the Financial Times. People could get instant access to accurate information on Facebook or Twitter, and we would be out of business. So, in fact, it's the very unreliability of social media that creates demand for traditional news organizations like ourselves. Because social media is unreliable, people who care about accurate information will use and pay for news organizations like our own. So given we are on a subscription basis, what is our role in countering fake news on social media? I think the first role of a traditional news organization is to be the guardians of truth. So if you do pay, if you do read an organization like mine or Peter's, then you can find out what the real facts are. And having people who are out there creating a record of what is really, the truth in some sense. Of course, the media are biased, people have different truths, but we're at least trying to record what is really true. Having that is the fundamental basis for countering misinformation, because if there aren't organizations that are reporting the truth, then it's impossible to police misinformation and fake news because there's no real news. So I think our fundamental role is just to do that. What we can't do is force people to read it. So the real question is what to do about the many people who don't really care whether they're getting accurate news and would much rather get news that they like and which fits their political bias, confirms their existing point of view. And frankly, I think the only realistic answer is for social media platforms to take responsibility as publishers for the information they distribute. As we all know, they're very reluctant to do that. They insist that they are platforms on which other people publish information. But it's very clear that if they want to, they are able to do this, as Twitter's ban on Donald Trump showed. And after allowing him free rein to say whatever he wanted for many years, just when he was on the way out, they decided he was suddenly unacceptable. And it's amazing how they were able to completely mute his voice in the public sphere, and you don't hear very much from Donald Trump anymore. So it shows that social media platforms have the power to control fake information, and it's down to them whether they want to use it, and it's down to publics and governments to decide whether they're going to demand that they use it. That's the end of my comments. Let me briefly come back to the point about how can traditional media raise trust in ourselves. It's extremely difficult. People often say, well, if you look at surveys, people will say they're reasonably confident that the traditional media is accurate, but they believe that we're biased. And the trouble with that is, if people don't like facts in some sense, and they think that the facts are biased against their political view, then they're going to believe that we're biased, and there's very little we can do about it. So I'm quite skeptical that there's anything traditional media can do to increase trust in ourselves, other than the things that we have always tried to do. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, for your very succinct and then very clear-cut, I think, answers to all these important questions. Now, let me move on to Chai. You have the floor, please.
Thank you. First of all, as Yamaguchi-san mentioned a while ago, we have the same experience insofar as the pandemic is concerned. We've had absurd false information circulating and going viral. For example, vaccines are experiments. If you take them, then you will die. Steam inhalation can cure COVID, or Filipinos in America got cured after drinking salt and warm water. It's not just the text, but even visuals like photos. For example, we've seen photos of Mr. Duterte supposedly doing the rounds during the pandemic. It's obviously intended to boost his political stock, when actually that photo was taken in 2017. So it's misrepresentation of photos. We've been trying to combat disinformation by fact-checking, and in fact, in last year, we tallied the fact checks that we've done, and 40% of our total fact checking was on COVID and the pandemic. We've also noticed that the platforms, Facebook in particular, has made sharing of information or stories that mention COVID-19, even from verified media like ourselves, less easy. And this has affected media's reach and its ability to assume a check and balance role. So this information has diminished that trust. We've been tagged as fake news. So Robin said, it's good for the media. In our case, no, it's very bad for us, because if we're tagged as fake news, then the credibility is gone. And as I said, we don't have a niche audience, we have a general audience. And even our partners, even our supporters are also attacked on social media. So it becomes more of a challenge. In our case, we're also approaching elections. So the pandemic can be politicized. We're anticipating that. For example, concretely in terms of vaccine distribution, troll armies have been hired by politicians, and the media will foreseeably have a tougher time doing our job as fact checkers. We are up against propaganda machines. And when I say machines, these are organized and systematic. There are troll farms, and they have directives, they have instructions, they have targets. And that's what we're up against. So when they say fake news and they do it repeatedly, it becomes real, it becomes true. Journalists also have to confront what we call influencers on social media. They're your celebrities, and they have lots of followers, millions of followers. So of course, if they have followers, how can ordinary journalists like us compete with them whenever they share disinformation and lies? And as we've seen, the repetition of lies can transform lies into truths, and people who follow these influencers become very, very vulnerable to disinformation. What have we tried to do? Fact-checking, as I said earlier, media literacy programs, video explainers, visuals, these are very, very elementary, but we have to resort to these because it's a general audience. And as I said earlier, also YouTube has become a major platform. It's surpassed Facebook as the platform of choice. So we've also had to produce more video. We've had to be present on TikTok, would you believe? Because that's where most of the young audiences are. And without anyone contesting what they're seeing, the disinformation and the lies that they're seeing on TikTok, they'll believe it to be true. So we don't love it, but yeah, it's a new platform that we're trying to experiment with and know. On a wider scale, we can't do this ourselves. media worldwide will really have to work together and collaborate, because there is an existential threat to the media. So partnerships and cross-border cooperation will be critical, because as we can see, as from our own experience, the problem is obviously global. Thank you.
Yes, Chai, thank you very much for really focusing on what we should do. I mean, what the conventional traditional medias should and can do to address these challenges. And then you touch on the measures to address the general audience, I think. Then I think what now I think we are really coming to a very interesting, I think, is issue, that is how then regulation on social media, to what extent regulations are justifiable. We all know, we learned in the subject of constitution, I think, freedom of speech versus a public safety, unless until it it, I think, threatens, provides a clear and immediate kind of risk threat to you, I think, the restrictions on the freedom of speech is not, I think, condoned. You see. So this is really a very important issue. Later, I'm sure I really would like to ask you to come back on this issue. But now, Peter, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just make 2 points. We've had a very thorough discussion already, but so I'll just sort of make 2 sort of addenda or additional points to what's been discussed already on the problems with social media. One is something that Robin already alluded to, and that is the question of whether social media platforms like Facebook are publishers. And I think this issue is on the road to being resolved. Robin said social media platforms need to embrace their roles as publishers, and I totally agree with that. It's something that's the CEO of our parent corporation, News Corp, Robert Thompson, who was a former Tokyo correspondent for the Financial Times, actually held a position like Robin, and in fact, also like Robin, he was promoted to a higher position. So congratulations to Robin for becoming Asia editor of the FT after a successful run in Tokyo. But anyway, our Robert Thompson, my boss's boss's boss, is now at the parent of the Wall Street Journal, and he has made this point now for several years. He said 4 years ago that Facebook is a publisher, and like all publishers, you have a responsibility for what you publish. And I think for a very long time, Facebook especially, and Google and YouTube also were reluctant to embrace that role, but now they're realizing they really have no choice, and it's their responsibility to ensure that the content on their website not just complies with the law in a very limited sense, but more broadly doesn't violate the public interest. And so partly because of pressure by Robert, I think sites like Facebook or Google, YouTube have been working more closely with traditional media. We have, for example, some videos we're now producing for YouTube, and I think we're getting paid for them. I'm not sure, but anyway, we are getting paid more by Google to feature our news. And so I think they are realizing that as social media platforms, they do have a role to raise up and enhance the trustworthy news that traditional news organizations are producing. We also discussed fact checks, and I appreciated the data in the presentation about how getting the correct facts out there can really tamp down or limit the spread of disinformation or misinformation. However, at least in the US context, there is some difficulty with fact checks that they may be, as we say, preaching to the converted. In other words, if you already trust the traditional news media, you may read a fact check and maybe your trust is enhanced further, but there are some people who are so allergic to what they perceive as biased mainstream news media, and they see a fact check from someone like the Wall Street Journal or New York Times or some perhaps independent nonprofit foundation putting out a fact check, it may not be that persuasive to those who are believing perhaps stories, really incorrect stories about problems with vaccines or that sort of thing. One piece of data that came out of the US in the vaccine disinformation discussion was that people were most persuaded by a message straight from their doctor. So I think, a news site's fact check may say, here's the data showing that vaccines are safe, but what a lot of people really wanted to hear was from their own doctor, perhaps saying that I myself took the vaccine, I've seen the data, and you can rely on the vaccine safety. It will help protect you against COVID-19. So I think that, again, for individual countries, the role of a fact check and what kinds of fact checks are most effective remains to be seen.
Thank you, Peter. Well, since we are close to 5:30, and then we have just half an hour left to conclude today's discussion, and also to have some Q&A session. But before that, I have just a question to all the panelists, especially Chai. Well, Peter just said, I think he seems, at least in the United States, a little bit encouraged in the sense that I think Facebook, including Facebook, they publish like Robert Thompson's view that a publisher must have a responsibility for what is published. And then it should be the ultimate responsibility of the website owner to ensure that content complies with the law. Now, in your country, the Philippines, do you think that can happen, or what is really necessary? Is it kind of a legal framework you think is possible or necessary, or any other kind of way of addressing this issue to ensure that the contents are, yes, reliable, trustworthy for the general public?
I agree with Robin and Peter that Facebook and other social media platforms have to be made accountable. I'm not sure about regulation. I'm not very comfortable with regulation because it could impinge on free speech. But maybe what can be done is for lawmakers to demand more transparency on the part of Facebook, because we're at the mercy of Facebook's algorithms. It puts a lot of emphasis on news media today. 2 weeks from now, after elections, it's changed totally, and suddenly what you're seeing on your feed or on your news feed are friends. So they're echo chambers, and it's difficult for the media to adjust to these changing algorithms, which Facebook does not disclose. So I think that's one important starting point.
Thank you. To Peter, well, what did you say when she said she feels a little bit uneasy if a legislation is to be introduced to control? In a way, it will impinge on the freedom of speech and such. In the United States, again, the Congress is going to discuss this issue. And at this moment, do you have any view on this?
Right, it's a constant tension, and yes, you don't want a situation where when social media is so powerful, especially without accountability, you don't want a situation where social media can say this one gets to speak and this one doesn't get to speak, and there's no, as Chai said, there's no way to appeal or even to find out in some cases that these decisions were made to silence this one and amplify this one. That is definitely a problem, and I think Congress in the US is wrestling with these problems. The whistleblower at Facebook who gave the Wall Street Journal and now other news organizations the documents that are known as the Facebook files or the Facebook papers testified before Congress just a few weeks ago as part of the beginning of efforts in the US to consider what kind of regulation is in line with our First Amendment to the Constitution, which does protect free speech, but also holds the social media platforms to accounts. So I think that's going to be a big issue going forward in the U.S. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, I mean, well, two things about Facebook. One is I don't mean to completely dismiss the value, as Robin has said. Of course, it's a great news platform. It's immediate. It's present on the scene, and so on. And it has a great value, as Facebook says, in connecting people. And one of the hosts of our podcast said that she used Facebook to connect with other parents who had a child with a particular unusual disease. And without Facebook, it's so hard to find other parents who are in the exact same situation as you are. So I don't want to deny, again, that social media can be a great platform to connect people in a good way. It's just that they spend so little, relatively speaking, on safety and security. A former colleague of mine observed that Facebook has spent $13 billion since 2016 on safety and security. Now, that sounds like a huge number, $13 billion. That would be like 1.5 trillion yen. And yet, in that same period, it spent almost 3 times that amount, $36 billion on share buybacks. So looking after the interests of shareholders. Now, of course, as the Wall Street Journal, I'm not going to say don't consider shareholders, but again, it's a question of holding the social media platforms to account and ensuring that they uphold their responsibility to protect the public interest.
Thank you, Peter. Now, I think we will conclude this discussion of today. I will ask each of 3 panelists, also 2 speakers, to tell the audience whatever in your final message, I think, based on today's discussion, for 3 minutes. But before that, I have 2 actually questions from the audience. Let me read it out and then answer these following questions. And the first question has come from Mr. Sadaaki Numata. Numata-san is former foreign ministry spokesman and a former ambassador to Canada and some other places. His question is addressed to Robin and Peter, 2 of you. I read out the following question. About 25 years ago, I heard my friends in London expressing their concern about the dumbing down of quality newspapers. Do you have such concerns today? What about the United States? So Peter or Robin, maybe your response, please.
I think I have to be extremely careful about this because I don't want to criticize competing organizations. The economic changes in media were affecting newspapers even before the internet came along. Newspaper readership was slowly declining, and there was also polarization politically into left and right, certainly in the UK media. So I think there were already concerns about quality in the media even before the internet came along and blew everything up. But I would actually say I think the internet has been great for quality journalism. There's more quality journalism available out there now than there has ever been before. So I don't think the existence of quality is the problem. The problem is the distribution of quality to people who don't want to pay for it.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
It's great to hear from Numata-san. I used to attend his press conferences when he was foreign ministry spokesman many years ago, and I actually saw him, he may not remember this, at the now infamous Sakura o Mirukai, the cherry blossom viewing party. The final one. I think it's been canceled forever, but anyway, so he looked in great health, and I'm glad to hear him ask a very fine question today. And I agree with Robin that it is always a balance for us. And you know, even the Wall Street Journal can get a lot of page views for a video about a cat looking funny or a dog, barking in a funny way. And that can last for a while, and it's a temptation all the time. But we do, I think, have an obligation to. I mentioned the obligation of social media platforms, but we too have an obligation to uphold quality, and we count on our readers also to, I would say, hold our feet to the fire and make sure that we're doing our jobs properly as we claim we are.
Okay, thank you. Again, well, the second question has come from Mr. Kiyotaka Kasaka. Actually, he is my predecessor here, the former president of FPCJ. His question is addressed again to Robin and Peter. I just quote, the strength of traditional media is their ability to analyze facts and information. Social media, news agencies, and TV can report facts quickly, and traditional media can make detailed analytical work. In this way, coexistence of different media may be possible. Nikkei seems to be doing that with the FT. Isn't this the way for other newspapers to follow? Robin?
Yes. So earlier on, Peter and Chai, I think, talked about scoops, and they're very important, but analysis is also important. What the Financial Times claims to do is not just tell you the news, but tell you what it means. And that's something that is extremely important. Social media is pretty good at analysis too. If you want to follow clever people who know about things, then social media is a great place to find them. But what a newspaper can also do is report and talk to the original sources of information, find out what they think they meant by something they said. So we do have a privileged position to provide analysis. I don't see any other way of doing that. And we certainly see it as the future of our media organization.
Thank you. Peter?
I would concur with Robin, and I actually would like to hear Chai answer that question. I wonder, at a news site such as hers, which is under such pressure from the authorities and so on, do you have time and the ability to do kind of a deeper analysis? It's not exact. That's not a scoop or new information necessarily, but new analysis. Is that something that Rappler tries to achieve?
Chai, please.
Yes, Peter, thanks for the question. Actually, we do that. We have one section under Rappler, which is called Newsbreak. Under that section, it's a combination of in-depth stories, perspective stories, analysis, and investigative stories. So all the unique content would be under that special section.
Okay, thank you. Just a final question from a gentleman called Mr. Junichi Kinoshita. His question is addressed to Mr. Yamaguchi Sensei, as follows. In addition to fake news, I think that transmission of individual preferences and evaluations is also a major problem. In particular, people tend to believe influencers' evaluations through SNS, regardless of evidence or fact. What do you think about this?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Well, first of all, there's a big premise there. Ever since the olden times, we always had a fraudster, different from influencers. But based on the misinformation, there are fraudsters who commit some fraud. And the social media came into being, and the fraudsters didn't increase in large number. But environment has become more conducive to attract people who would be in contact with such a fraudster, like influencers who speak about their views over vaccine and so forth. They say that you will become frail as a result of vaccination and so forth, that kind of misinformation. a seminar is organized or health food is promoted or earn some money as a result of writing some article along with it. Such a kind of thing had occurred in large number. What can we do about it? Only self-defense. There is a title or the powerful dissertation and the powerful way that one may talk. And also there was a, you believe in own doctor, but your doctor, GP might say something which is a lie, not true. So you have to be the one who own ownership in going out there and get the information yourself. I think this is a kind of the habit that the people has to be equipped with. There are big influences over influencers. Then if too much influence is wielded by the influencer, then the social platforms have to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yamaguchi. Now, we are really coming to the concluding part of our discussion. I would ask the two speakers, Mr. Shimoyama-san, and then followed by Mr. Yamaguchi, to give us their respective final thought on today's discussion, and followed by Chai now, and then Peter, and then last but not the least, of course, Robin. You will wrap up the discussion. Then we will conclude the symposium today. So Shimoyama-san, please, you have the floor.
All right. Okay. I'm really impressed with the discussion so far, and I wish I had more time. And however, now it's we need to finalize our discussion. And so, and when I researched my book, Millennium 2050, and I checked internal document within Yomiuri. Yomiuri is biggest newspaper company in Japan. And Tsuneo Watanabe, he is a great journalist and a kind of fixer. And he said in a statement to our employees that you cannot find answer in the internet, but you can find answer in books. And I thought it is a very compelling comment, and it's also can apply to all journalists who works for web news. Because as Robin and Chai told to us that analysis is important, they said. And so I think stories which stand against the time is very important. And most of Japanese newspapers articles are kind of access journalism. So they follows, what officials and cops and prosecutors, leaks, and they, scoop. They kind of scoop these informations in advance and compete against other newspapers. But however, in the age of internet, that kind of access journalism are easily, beaten by analysis and investigative reportings, which stand against the time. That is my, closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shimoyama-san. Thank you very much. Yamaguchi-san, please. Mr. Yamaguchi, please unmute your microphone.
All right. It was a very informative discussion. Thank you very much. So everyone who have been here have a high awareness about the issue of social media, and also seriously thinking about the responsibility that traditional news organization has, as well as social media platforms. I feel the same. Of course, there are many positive points about social media, but I have a problem as well. as we had heard today, we are also mindful of the freedom of speech. So freedom of speech have to be upheld, yet the problem also need to be solved and eliminated. That's a balancing act. So maybe there are about 4 points we can do apart from the law. That's my conclusion. First point. Architectural innovation can be done for the social media, like a labeling and the issuing the alert and so forth, and ensuring transparency by taking measures. So proactively, all these can be done on the social platform front. And the people talked about the fact check, which can be promoted by media. And also, more efficiently, the social media fact-checked results need to be distributed more, circulated more. Fact-check was done, but it's a pity if the results cannot get around and circulated and go viral. So social media can do something about it so that on priority basis, fact-check results can be shared with the influencer from which it can be circulated widely. Third is the reliability, credibility of the media. People who tend to be discontent with the media, they tend to be gullible about the misinformation. So maybe the way that media people cover the story need to be shared more with the general public. Because in Japan, media education is not emphasized. How media is fact-checked, how accurately stories are told by traditional media. People do not know that in Japan. So maybe media have to be more proactive in telling the people what they are doing so that the accurate information can be imparted. Next is the education and enlightenment, and making the video or education material so that media can be a subject for education as well. Then the media literacy would go up amongst the population. Of course, we used to be familiar with the rumor and misinformation. Traffic accident number would never go down to 0. So similarly, we can do so that influence coming from the misinformation can be reduced. And that has to do with education on media. We have to be more resistant against the misinformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maguchi. Now, Shai, you have the floor.
Yeah, just very quickly, I feel like we were on ground zero insofar as social media and disinformation is concerned. And as early as 2015 or 2016, we had already experienced the attacks on social media, trolls, and we actually called the attention of Facebook to this, but it never paid attention until Trump happened. And so when we were watching what was going on in the US, we said, okay, this isn't new to us. We had experienced it previously. And I think this is the important thing. If policymakers, lawmakers, legislators want to introduce changes for social media platforms, they first have to understand what is going on in social media. They have to experience it rather than, propose policies and legislation theoretically. They have to see the harm, they have to see the danger that is going on. And then besides policymakers and legislators, I guess even the tech companies themselves have to be part of the effort. The experts who understand social media and technology, and even civil society will have to jump in, because clearly the media alone, journalists alone cannot solve the problem. Facebook cannot solve the problem by itself because it's conflicted. So all these the pressure, maybe political pressure, and the desire to bring about better social media platforms that will highlight the good, because that was originally the intent of Facebook, I believe. It's just that things have been overturned, and what has surfaced is more the bad more than the good that was intended. Thank you.
Thank you, Shai. Peter?
I would again stress the importance of education that I think came up just a moment ago. You know, I see that even with my own kids who are in their late teens. I have a daughter in college and a son in high school, and you know they do. I think they're pretty well educated, but still sometimes I see them relying too much on what's on the internet without asking how did it get there, and again, to quote our CEO, Robert Thompson, he's talked about the profundity of provenance. He likes to use big words, but profundity just means importance, and provenance means where something came from. And I think it's a skill that probably even more today than before, students probably need to learn in school. I don't want to dictate educational curriculums, but for example, look at a Wikipedia page. There's probably in the Wikipedia page on Japan, for example, or the Wikipedia page on Joe Biden or Fumio Kishida. There's probably a lot of good information there. It's not just fake news or whatever, or even on Twitter, you see things on Twitter. Somebody says, I heard Prime Minister Kishida said this, or I think Prime Minister Kishida stands for that. Well, maybe that's actually legitimate news, and maybe you should believe what you just read. And it's a question of digging deeper and finding out where did the information come from, and did Mr. Kishida say that himself, or is this something that someone guessed? All of these questions that journalists ask all the time about our sources and about the things that we read or hear in discussions. I think increasingly the general public needs to have that skill as well, to distinguish, as we've discussed today, fake news from real news and facts from speculation.
Well, thank you, Peter. Now, lastly, Robin, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, I'm very honoured to have the last word in such a distinguished gathering, and it's been really fascinating to listen to what all the panelists had to say. As I think was probably clear from my comments throughout, I feel that traditional media doesn't actually have much of a role when it comes to social media. Our job is, as it always has been, to create accurate news. The challenge of social media and misinformation that spreads via it is a problem for society at large, whether that's through education, as Chai and Peter have just suggested, or through regulation, or through whatever channel. I'm not sure that there is much that traditional media can directly do about it. I'd also just add a note of optimism, though. Yes, I think education is very important, but I also think the young are incredibly internet savvy, and they're learning to distinguish between true information and fake information online. And I think as grown-ups, they're going to be extremely good at it. They will have grown up with these things, and it will be natural to them. The places where fake information online is really wreaking havoc is with an older generation that's used to being able to believe what they see in the media. And they've taken that over to social media, and they're very inclined to just believe whatever's out there. So I'm actually quite optimistic that through social pressure on the big social media operators to change, and through young people who are much better at all of this digital stuff than the older generation, that this problem of misinformation on social media has already passed its peak and will now start to decline. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you to the two distinguished keynote speakers and also three panelists for your words of wisdom, I think, which are all very valuable. I have actually, my colleague just gave me one extra question, actually. It arrived at my desk rather belated, but let me read it out, and then if anyone could volunteer to answer the following question, I think, well, the questioner will be very happy to hear. This is a question from Ms. Kamal, well, I don't know his gender, Kamal Gabala, I think, who is an Egyptian, I think. I just read out the question. In Egypt, as everywhere in the world, our printed and other normal TV, radio, media is dying. It's a real disaster for the thousands of employees. Of course, we are all welcoming the social media. My question to the panelists is, what is your advice for the printed press? I think we have heard some of the advice already, but anyway, how to survive for the other media? Anyone, just volunteers? Any volunteer to respond to this question? Maybe Chai?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Please. Thank you.
We're 100% online, so no print, no radio, no television affiliate, and we're on our ninth year this year, and just this year and maybe I think last year we've hit positive growth, so we're past the red, and we're very happy with that despite the challenges. So I think you just have to have quality content, maintain credibility and trust of your audience. And if you're online, then you cut on costs for paper and all these other attendant costs, because it's really just the internet. So it's basically that. I'd say try to go online.
Thank you all. Let me just give my concluding remarks. Nothing about the contents of what we discussed. Rather, first of all, I would like to thank first of all the audiences who joined us this afternoon to follow our discussions in this online symposium. Thank you all for your patience and for your interest in our discussion today, this afternoon. And then secondly, of course, I would like to thank again two distinguished keynote speakers, Mr. Shimoyama and Mr. Yamaguchi, for your contribution this afternoon. And also my words of thanks to the three very distinguished panelists from the US, Peter from the UK, Robin of Financial Times, oh yes, Peter of Wall Street Journal, and then Chai, representing of Rappler. Thank you all. Now, let me explain briefly about at least my organization to the viewers, especially the foreign FPCJ's activities. I will be very brief. Let me just share the following slides on the screen. The Foreign Press Center holds briefings, especially in Japanese and in English, by government officials, including cabinet ministers, by famous experts in the various fields, academicians and experts from private sector. Videos of all these briefings are available on the FPCJ website. So please take a look. Please visit our website. We also hold press tours to locations throughout Japan, providing opportunities to report on unique regional industries, small and medium industry the corporations, cutting-edge technology, traditional culture, and initiatives to deal with the social issues. So our center also sends out an email newsletter with information on our activities and valuable information for reporting or promotional activities. So if you are interested, please check the box in the webinar survey we will be sending to receive the news, the newsletter. And also do send us your honest, candid comments on what you have heard today from our symposium. I would very much appreciate any comments, any suggestions to us based on today's symposium. Very finally, again, thank you very much to all of you for taking your time today to join this webinar. Now, the FPCJ plans to hold yet other, of course, international webinars next year and beyond on what I call the overarching topic of mega trends facing the world, be it climate, demographic change, digital transformation, or the ongoing inequities in income and wealth, or knowledge and health, education. These are all valuable issues, I think, confronting the world of today. So we hope to see you participating in these other webinars as well. So thank you all and have a good evening. Thank you. Now again, well, Peter, Shimoyama-san, Yamaguchi-san, Robin, and Chai, thank you again. Yes, we'll be in touch. And then I hope you, well, thank you for your contribution. I hope you enjoyed this afternoon, like I did.
Yes, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
yeah.
Thank
Very
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.